This is Nick from Nick and Mellows Hyperspace. I greatly appreciate you guys for joining us this evening. On our episode today, we have a very special guest, somebody I've been looking forward to talking to for a while now. He finally and I were able to make time together and do a podcast. I want to introduce Mr. Ethan Sachs. For those of you who
Hey,
don't know Ethan, he is a writer for Marvel Comics, currently working on the ongoing Bounty Hunters comic for Star Wars, which is one of my favorite comics going on right now. And just glad to have Ethan on. And I want to kind of talk about his experience as a writer and kind of how he got into Star Wars and all that fun stuff. So, Ethan, if you want to give a quick introduction about yourself, go right ahead.
sure. Well, first of all, Nick, thanks for having me. I appreciate anyone who wants to listen to me yammering on, so I do appreciate it. My name is Ethan Sachs. I am a journalist turned comic book writer. For about 20 years, I was at the New York Daily News. One of the things I did there was cover the Geek Beat, which was everything from comic books to Star Wars to Walking Dead, Game of Thrones, all that sort of fun stuff. So long story short, I am good friends with Joe Quesada, and in 2016 I had for May the Fourth Be With You, I had an assignment to interview Paul Blake, who was the actor who played Greedo. And long story short, it was a fantastic interview. He was a very funny guy, and we were talking about who shot first. And what it came down to is he said in the script it says Han shoots Alien. So after that interview, it sort of stuck in my head. I don't know how many of listeners out there know Rashomon, the classic Japanese movie by Kurosawa, the great director Kurosawa, based on a novel. It's basically a murder mystery set in feudal Japan where someone is murdered and there are four different witnesses, including his ghost, and none of the accounts match. So I thought it'd be funny to do like a murder investigation into Greedo, where all these witnesses can't agree on whether Han or Greedo shot first. So I went to a Mets game with Joe, who was then chief creative officer of Marvel. Just to keep this a fairly short story, I said, "Hey, do you mind if I send you a spec script? I have this idea I can't get out of my head. If it's published, because I'm still at the newspaper, I will, donate proceeds or whatever. I just want to write it down." So he was like, "Fine, whatever." He was not very supportive of the idea. So I ended up spending some time. I'd never written a comic book script before, but I had read so many that I sort of reverse engineered, the structure and everything. I wrote it, didn't hear anything back for months. Then I was coming back from a trip to see my in-laws in Japan, and the plane lands on September 7th, 2016. I get the email that changes my life, and the subject line was F Greedo. I will not spell it out for you. So, so I see that, and it had been months since I had sent in the script. So I was like, "Oh my God, he must have really hated it." But the gist of the letter was, "F Greedo, you can actually write comic books, and I think you have a future in this." About a month later, the paper was offering buyouts. So I'd been there 20 years, so it was like 7 months pay. So if I was going to take a chance, that was the time to do it. So I did. And that was how my comic book career started. Marvel really liked it. Lucasfilm seemed to like it, but there was a continuity reason that they did not want to publish it. So it was never published.
Okay.
But that was the script that sort of got me in the door at Marvel.
That's a really interesting story. Are you still a journalist? I don't keep up with you outside of comics.
No worries. I mean, I consider myself so. I
Okay.
worked part-time at NBC News up until the end of 2021, and I've done some nonfiction journalism comics for AWA Studios, which ran on NBC
Uh,
News. One called COVID Chronicles, one called Climate Crisis Chronicles. Both were like I did interviews with real life people, like, a firefighter fighting wildfires in California or things like that, emergency room nurse. So we're telling their stories with the great artist Dalibor Talajic. So I was using my journalism skills and my comic book skills. So in that way, yes, but not full time. And
okay. Not a traditional
it's
journalist, I guess.
not anymore. Yeah,
Right.
I miss it a little bit, but there is nothing more fun than writing comic books.
Yeah. I've been a fan of comics for a long time, and I've always been fascinated with how the process works and behind the scenes. And it's really cool story. I don't think I've heard a comic book writer tell a story like that before, so I kind of enjoyed that.
Yeah,
Um,
I don't know that I'm any indication for like a way in for anybody else.
yeah,
It was so random, such a random set of
yeah,
circumstances. But I guess the takeaway is that you're A, never too old, and B, there's no one path. So
right.
that's the sort of the silver lining on all that.
I want to ask you about your Star Wars origin story. Kind of, when did you first see Star Wars? How did you get involved with being a fan of Star Wars?
Well, I'm old. So I was 4 years old when A New Hope, then just Star Wars, came out into
Okay.
theaters. And it was such a powerful experience for me. I saw it in Times Square and in Lowe's Theater. And my dad took me. And I still have the memory of the Star Destroyer flying overhead and John Williams score and turning to look at my dad. And it was like the most amazing thing I'd ever seen. And it's so vivid that it's like my father's still alive. He died in 1995. I can still hear his voice. Everything is like preserved in my memory. And I did get to tell that story over the years as a journalist to Carrie Fisher, to Mark Hamill, to Anthony Daniels, and to George Lucas. So
Wow.
just to thank them for the, it really, of all the I love Marvel superheroes, I love DC superheroes, I love all sorts of pop culture things, but my North Star is Star Wars. It is the single thing that made me want to be a writer, made me go down this path. And it's just something that I can put on any of the Star Wars movies to this day, and I become a 4-year-old again.
As I like asking people this question, it's a very generic question, but I'm just always curious. Is A New Hope your favorite Star Wars film, or do you have one?
I do have one. It's The Empire Strikes Back,
Okay.
because as much as I love A New Hope, just The Empire Strikes Back, I think is as close to a perfect movie, taking even the Star Wars out of it. And I just think I remember so vividly seeing it in a theater when I was 7, and then you realize it ends, and Han Solo is still
He's
like,
missing
it
it.
ends in a cliffhanger, which I had never seen before in a movie at my age. So I had to wait 3 years, and I just having the good guys lose and get their butts kicked. It was just so, it's so dark, and it just really captivated me in a way that still captivates me. Close number 2 for me is Rogue One,
Okay.
and to some extent Andor. Like I definitely gravitate towards the darker.
Yeah, the grittier things
Yeah,
in Star Wars.
yeah,
Yeah, I from reading Bounty Hunters that it gets a little dark sometimes, and I appreciate that about it. Funny you mentioned the cliffhanger and having to wait 3 years, and um, I think I remember I'm not going to spoil this movie. It just came out this year, Across the Spider Verse.
hmm,
I'm not going to spoil it too much, but it ends on a cliffhanger. And I
yeah,
remember taking my brothers, went with my wife and my friend, one of my good friends, and I think I was the only one that maybe knew it was going to be. There's a sequel coming, and I
yeah,
had a feeling it was going to end on a cliffhanger. But I remember them all being like questioning, how are you going to end a movie like that? What you going to wait? We're going to wait how long for the next one? And it just got delayed, so it's going to be a couple of years. But they're all like, "Are you serious? We got to wait two and a
yeah,
half, 3 years?" I'm like, "That's hey, it was doing that with Empire and Jedi, and
yeah.
it's not the first time that's ever happened." So,
Yeah,
um,
keep in mind that after Return of the Jedi ended, no disrespect to like droids and Ewoks and those cartoons, but I had to wait from 1983 to 1999 really
mhm,
to continue the saga. So now having a new series like every few months is, I don't think younger fans necessarily fully appreciate how good they have it, how
right,
good we all have it, because I have it
exactly,
just as good. Yeah.
exactly. I don't know how much you can disclose about with how you work at Marvel, but you've done some different work. I kind of wanted to show off to the audience and talk about. I know you've written the Halcyon Legacy. That was
Mhm.
one of the miniseries you just finished up a few months ago.
Yep.
Um, the Galaxy's Edge miniseries, which I do have a copy of that one. To show this off to the audience. Very fun story, very little anthology series. And then you have also Star Wars Allegiance, another little mini series that I actually just read this morning. I was
Mhm.
preparing for this, and a fun one. I have not
That's
read it since it came
oh,
out,
that's an official prequel to Rise of the Skywalker.
and
So I
I
can
I had
tell you
forgotten
about
that.
that a bit. Yeah.
Yeah, I had forgotten about that, and then I read it, and I was like, oh yeah, that's that's how this one ended. Um, it was fun. I enjoyed reading those again, and like I said, you've done some other things other than Star Wars. You've
Mhm.
I think you did, was it the Old Man Hawkeye? Was that a one shot you
Yep.
did? Okay.
It was a 12 issue miniseries to start, and that was actually my first like big hit
Okay.
as a comic book writer. So that's sort of like what got my career going. The most I had done a few other things, but the one I will mention is Silver Surfer Annual
Right.
#1, which there was an editor there by the name of Tom Groneman who was the editor on this book, and this was sort of the first book that he edited as like a lead editor. But his primary responsibility at the time was being assistant editor to Mark Paniccia, who was the editor of Star Wars line. So we had such a good time with the Silver Surfer one that he's like, I want to bring you into the Star Wars group. So he was all credit to Tom. So the Silver Surfer brought me into a whole different galaxy.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, so that was how I got into Star Wars. And the very first thing I did for Star Wars, I'm going to flip this computer, so I don't know how many people will watch this, but you can see a piece of original art by Paolo Villanelli on the wall. That's from a 10-page Mace Windu story for Age of Republic special. And
Wow.
that was my first ever Star Wars story. It's called The Weapon. And it's such an important thing that I ended up getting a tattoo at
Oh, that
Star
is
Wars
neat.
Celebration. That's Mace
Oh,
Windu's lightsaber.
that is
So
so
that
cool.
was how I spent my Star Wars Celebration this year. So that was my very first Star Wars story. And actually, I was paired with Paolo Villanelli. It was 10 pagers, so we didn't like necessarily get to know each other that well. But little did we know that we would spend close to 4 years
Mhm.
on Bounty Hunters. So small world. But anyway,
It
so that from
is.
there I did Galaxy's Edge was the second thing. And Galaxy's Edge was with the artist Will Sliney, and that was obviously for the release of the theme park, Galaxy's Edge Batu
Mhm.
in Disney World and Disneyland.
And Will Slimy, if correct me if I'm wrong, he did the art for the Halcyon Legacy as well.
Yes, he did. Yeah,
Okay.
they Disney Parks really liked what we did with Galaxy's Edge. So essentially, Halcyon Legacy is a not quite a sequel because it's not really the same characters, but it's
Mhm.
sort of a spiritual sequel.
Right. Yeah. I've enjoyed both of those. They're fun. They're
Thank you.
they kind of stand on their own for the most part, and there is a linear story going through all, which if you read all together, you can
Yeah, and that
piece it
actually
together.
started because with Galaxy's Edge originally was just going to be like an anthology series kind of, but I didn't want that because I kind of felt like if you're a reader and it's like, I'll skip 3 and I'll just read 4 because I like
Mhm.
this character. And I wanted that because we're showing different parts of of this incredible world that they've built, that I wanted people to read the whole thing. So I felt like I needed a heist that ran through the whole story
Mhm.
to sort of make it important enough to, for all those issues to matter.
Right. I enjoy too how you get to touch on different eras of Star Wars, and so many different
Yeah.
characters get to show up, and it's
I
very
pretty
fun.
much get to pick all these characters that I've just always wanted to write.
Really? Okay. I didn't
Yeah.
know you get to do
So
that.
yeah, like I had to justify it, but
Right. Right. Right.
I was like,
Well,
oh, we have a baby Sarlacc, so it's like, well, who's going to rustle that up? Well, why not Han Solo and Chewie? Because I've always wanted to write them. So
I
yeah,
remember reading it. I got the trade, and I remember reading it for the first time, and I think it's issue 3, or maybe it's issue 3 or 4. I can't remember which one, but Hondo Anaka shows up,
yeah,
and the whole issue with Hondo, and I was tickled pink. I love Hondo. He's one of my favorite characters, and
mine too.
he doesn't get a lot of page time with comics or
Mhm.
novels recently, but every time he shows up, I'm there for it. So that was a fun one.
Yeah, I think a lot of the Filoni characters, it's hard to write them because so much is in flux because they're still making stories. So you don't want to sort of step on the continuity. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So it's hard. Like if you're using characters from the original trilogy during the original trilogy, you pretty much know what you can and can't do. But it's harder when there's a character that is in motion. You know what I mean?
Right.
So that's I think. But Hondo is unique because we get to play with him because he's
Right.
all over the place.
That's right.
Yeah, he's the only character that was in both um Galaxy's Edge and Halcyon Legacy.
Mhm.
And
That's
that's not an accident.
another fun issue I liked with him and Lando teaming up. That's
Yeah, I was like, I would like to do a heist with the two of them.
oh
Just
yeah.
because it's like, it's like a buddy comedy.
Yes.
Um
A lot of
you know,
humor in that
so
issue.
yeah, I just, that was so much fun to write.
I wanted to share a little bit about how I came into bounty hunters. The beginning of 2020, before the world turned upside down, I had always collected trades and read digital, but a friend of mine at work, he collects singles and floppies, and he kind of talked me into it. So the first one I got was Charles Soule Star Wars #1. That was the first floppy I started collecting. And then I think I had saw when I was at the comic book store a preview for Bounty Hunters, and I love the Bounty Hunters in Star Wars, some of my favorite characters. So I instantly was like, well, I'm going to pull that one too. And then, like I said, the world turned upside down and it got shipping and things got delayed. But um, those two have been the ones that have been constant on the pull list, and some of the only runs that I've collected every issue of. I wanted to ask you, I don't know how much, like I said, you're willing to disclose, but how did you get approached to write Bounty Hunters, and kind of how did that idea come to be?
After I'd done Galaxy's Edge, Mark Panicia, the editor, approached and said, hey, we'd like you to do, we're in a unique position. It's not going to last forever, but as long as it lasts, we're enjoying it, where you have these 4 main books, Star Wars, Darth Vader, Dr. Aphra, and Bounty Hunters, that are all exist in the same time period. So you can have crossovers, you can have things that happen in one matter and another. And you didn't really have that as much in Star Wars comics, at least before, where, because you're in the same era at the same time. So it was very important to them that they have 4 strong planks. And as they were sort of, they decided one of them would be Bounty Hunters. And Mark, one of the priorities for Mark was to sort of make the main character be Valance, because Valance was a character that was, a very important character in the original Marvel run, in the late 70s. And like, basically we brought him back into canon, or they had brought him back into canon, shortly before. And so they really wanted to sort of elevate this character. And Mark's idea originally was that it would sort of be the Punisher in space. But I was a little less excited about that, because I don't love characters that necessarily, it's not that I love these characters, but I don't necessarily want a character that can just shoot or punch their way out of anything. Like I like them with a little bit of human frailty. And so what I kind of pitched was more of basically like a soldier with PTSD, somebody who was like catastrophically injured physically, and he had rebuilt himself for the most part physically, but he's still a mess emotionally. I've said this before, but like the central theme in this book is trauma, which is why I always traumatize these characters, and hopefully down the road there'll be a happy ending. But in order to get over the trauma, they have to be traumatized during the course of the series. So that was my way in with him. But at the same time, we all grew up with these classic bounty hunters. And so what we really wanted to do was have them in this book somehow. Basically over the course of the series, it ended up becoming more of an ensemble book, I think, than was originally envisioned. It just naturally and I introduced some characters that were kind of special to me as part of it. Biggest one being Tonga, one of the bounty hunters. So it ended up becoming a team, and this team of slightly dysfunctional people, working together and, failing sometimes, but kind of oftentimes succeeding. This is the first ongoing that I've ever done. So I was a bit naive at the start, and I had these threads that are only now paying off, or, may not pay off for another few issues. And I didn't really have the idea, like, this could have ended after 6 issues,
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't necessarily know what I was doing in that front. Because I think if it did end after 6 issues or 12 issues or whatever, there would have been a lot of subplots that went nowhere. But what I do like is a lot of these characters have evolved over time. Fukora is a character that comes to mind. There's a lot more to come, so I don't want to spoil it. But that's how it started. It started as very much being on one hand, a Valance book, and on another hand, this sort of bounty hunters ensemble book. And it's only recently that's sort of been merged. Also, there was supposed to be a second book that involved when Valance was basically pulled in by Darth Vader to sort of run this elite unit. Originally, that was going to be like a spin-off miniseries. But because of the paper shortage at the time, like, they had to make some difficult decisions on whatnot to. So that's why Valance disappeared from the book for a while, ended up in Vader.
Pops up. Oh,
So
okay.
we had all these plans, and then we had to sort of kind of cram it back into Bounty Hunters and shorten it.
Gotcha.
So like I think a lot of that arc I had in mind, but it was sort of, we had to change it on the fly to sort of, fit this new reality, unfortunately. But I think hopefully it worked.
Yeah, I remember that happening, and I remember being disappointed because he's been very he's kind of the heart and soul of the team, and he's been such an interesting character. I didn't know really anything about the character until I started reading Bounty Hunters, and I've really just fell in love with him. He's become one of my new favorite characters in comics. You said earlier, this was the first ongoing you've done. Was there was there any kind of intimidation you felt, or any kind of how did you approach it different? Did you approach it differently, or did you know kind of what to do, I guess?
I mean, I think like I was working arc by arc, but I would put these little, things like Cordelia, what's going to happen with her, and then that didn't pay off until, Crimson Reign and Hidden Empire and all the, so it's sort of things like that happen. But for the most part, I was living arc to arc. And then as I got my sort of feet under me, by maybe issue 11, 12, then I started planning longer term,
Gotcha.
like I would plan on doing things, and like 2 years later, we pulled the trigger on some of the things.
How do you guys? How does the crossover with the other writers and artists? How does that work? Do you guys, get together? Do you guys kind of
Yeah,
know what's
we
coming?
had we haven't had one in a bit, but we had these weekly Zoom calls
Okay.
Wednesday night, where it was like Charles and Greg and Alyssa and Mark Guggenheim and the editors. And often if somebody was going to write like a spin-off series for a bit, they would have come into. And aside from it being like the most fun, these people have become some of my closest friends over the last 4 years. But also on top of it, like it really helps. There were all these ideas that they help you refine. And that's why I feel, and I know I'm biased here, but I really feel like we're so cohesive, and it all ties in so well together. And that's really because we're all working together, and we're all reading each other's scripts and offering advice. And Charles is our quarterback. Like he's basically all those crossovers have started with these brilliant ideas that he's had. And the great thing too, like he's a superstar in comics, and yet he is just so giving of time and advice and guidance. And he designs these crossovers so that everybody can have some fun with it in their own books, in their own way. It isn't like, okay, we're going to do this, and it's not that at all. Like he'll say, I'd like to do this with this character. How can that help you? Would you like me to do something different? You know what I mean? It's always this collaborative. I mean, it's a gift to work with these people. It just is really a gift. And then the other part of this equation is obviously comics is a collaboration with visuals, with the art teams. And I've been gifted for most of this run to have one artist, Pal Villanelli. We had
Mhm.
30 issues together, which is almost unheard of nowadays.
Yes.
And then every quote unquote guest artist before and after has been fantastic too. So most recently Lon Medina. So I always leave pages, like for action scenes. I always leave, okay, here are like the 3 main beats we have to do, but for these next 4 pages, you design this, how, like, have fun,
Oh, that's
because they're
cool.
so good at that. Yeah. So it really is a team. It is a team that just works really well together.
Yeah, I've somebody who's read all the big events and the crossovers. It is very nice. You can tell there's a cohesive. Everybody's on the same page. It doesn't really feel like it's disjointed, or not going to badmouth any other companies or even Marvel itself when they do crossovers. Sometimes it doesn't feel that way. It feels very kind of in its own little corner of the universe. But Star Wars comics, I think, out of other comics that I've read, it just feels so cohesive, and the narrative flows so smoothly between all the characters, and the interactions feel genuine of how they've been written in the past. So I appreciate that, and that's actually interesting to hear. I did not know you guys did that.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, I think the greatest, this franchise is truly unique, and like unlike any other franchise in that all the continuity matters. So like the
Mhm.
comics are tie into the movies, tie into the video games, tie into the novels, even tie into the theme parks. And so like the stakes on this is high because it affects like the Luke Skywalker that you see in the movie. Like, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
Everything matters. There's not going to be a cosmic being coming in and wiping away the continuity and fixing everything the way it was. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it is truly unlike anything else in pop culture, I think.
I've said that too. Both Carmelo and I've had many discussions about that. And yeah, like you said, we go see Spider-Man on the big screen, and I go to my local comic book store. They're going to be completely unrelated, but Star Wars, can go pick up. Oh, there's that background character that I seen in the latest movie, and he's got his own little one shot or something. It's fun. I have never really known anything about Zuckuss,
Mhm.
and he has become one of my favorite characters. I don't know what it is. He has been great, and in the Daniel Jose Older actually did the one shot of Four Lemon
Yeah.
Zuckuss, just one of my favorite comics ever, and I've enjoyed him on the team. He is a breath of fresh air. Didn't really know anything about him. I just thought he was one of those action figures that people collected because he was in the movies. But man, he's got a really fascinating story and really cool skills. He's very great. I adore him dearly.
Yeah, both Daniel and I were lucky in that, despite Zuckuss being a character that's in an original trilogy movie, there's very little of the background or anything that's been actually set in Disney era canon. So that gave us a lot of freedom. I had a whole issue where I could tell his childhood secret origin story, basically.
Yes.
And that was so much fun because we'd never been to the planet Gand. And so got to envision it and work with the artist and I like just a good little guy. I write Zuckuss for LOM, and by the way, it's for LOM, as I
Not
found the
Forlom.
hard way, because my entire life I said for Lom, and I was corrected by Story Group. So in general, the droids are sort of pronounced phonetically so that you can visualize how they're spelled. I guess it's always been the
Yeah,
thing. But anyway, as an aside, I write them as Bert and Ernie.
I can see it.
Yeah, I just write them as Bert and Ernie, like these just really good. They're best friends, totally different personalities. 4LOM is like the Bert and just kind of tolerates him a bit, but also, obviously cares. So
Mhm.
it's that's how I sort of envisioned them and how I wrote them.
One thing I wanted to ask is, not to get too spoilery, but there was a recent shakeup with the team in the comics. Did that come? Is that something? I don't know if that's something you can talk about, but is that something that came organically, or was it something that you kind of felt like there needed to be a shakeup?
I can't talk too much, but I can say this: there were several factors that went into it.
Okay.
Not all mine, but
Okay.
I think the two people that left. One is, as you probably could tell from last issue, has not really. There's like a whole other story, and I thought it was important for me that Losha not just be Tonga's wife.
Okay.
And so I think, without giving anything away, there's an arc which I think is going to be pretty cool. Obviously, I'm biased, but I struggled with that one a little bit because you get into. I think like if you listen to veterans who've been in the industry a long time, you don't like this is why the Avengers lineups always change and things like that. It's very easy to get kind of you like the status quo and then you stay in it. So I think getting a little bit of a shakeup and some of the dynamic that came out of that, I think was helpful. I miss Tasu. I kind of had to let him
Mm-hmm.
go because he was always on borrowed time.
Yes.
It's a character that obviously has his roots in a much older version in live action. So I don't know. I could never go all the way to that point, so it's always like I can borrow him for a while. And so I'm grateful that I got him because he was a fun character to write,
He
to
is.
basically see this, yes, he's this killer and he's quite good at it and he relishes the killing, but he's also something naive about him at the time.
Mhm.
and he basically grows up into somebody who, doesn't like speaking basic because obviously he's become cynical. So something along the way made him cynical. So you see some of that here, and eventually, like, he basically wants to be with his own people, and so. I would love to tell a slightly older version of stories about a slightly older version of him at some point. I don't know
Yeah.
if I'll ever get that opportunity, but I was grateful for the time I had.
Yeah, he was a fun addition, and I had not realized that he was in The Force Awakens until I rewatched it a couple
Yeah.
years ago. And when you first brought him on, and uh, the name was said in the movie, and I was like, wait a minute. So I had to look it up, and I was like, oh my god, I had no idea. It didn't even cross my mind. I
Well,
thought he was an
so
original character for
those
the
those
longest.
two actors in that scene, including the one who plays Tasu Leach, were in one of my favorite non-Star Wars movies, The Raid. It's a fantastic action movie, very violent action movie. And so obviously J.J. Abrams liked that movie too. So he cast them in a fairly small parts. So I just was like, oh, it's a little bit of a waste to have these actors, these incredible martial arts actors, in this tiny cameo.
Mhm.
So it's like, I would love to know what this character. So I needed a young, kind of brash character, one of the early issues, to fight balance. So that, I think it was in issue 8, and so I was like, wow, what if it's a young version of Tasso Leach? And my God, Lucasfilm let me do that. Like, obviously I couldn't kill him off.
Right.
That was the only thing. But other than that, they gave me a lot of freedom.
And recently, some news broke of a new comic you're writing. I would like to give you the opportunity to talk about that if you can, and give the
Yeah,
audience kind of a little information about it.
sure, sure. There, this project is a creator-owned project. I'm very, very proud of it. It's the most personal thing I've ever done. I'm co-writing it with my daughter, and it's a supernatural sort of teen horror. I mean, very much a PG-13 horror movie, if you will. It's called A Haunted Girl, and it is inspired by my daughter's real life battles with depression and hospitalization a few years ago. And at that time, I really wanted to come up with a story that would inspire teens like her to keep fighting and persevering, and we ended up 4 years later, she's in a place where she could write it with me. And we partnered with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, and they have like a resource guide in the back. And I'd like to think the story is entertaining for those who don't need that, but also hopefully there's like an extra layer of catharsis and like just being seen by
Mhm.
readers who do need that. So yeah, that's coming in the first. It's a 4-issue miniseries, just
Okay.
coming out October 11th is the first issue. And
Okay.
my good friend Joe Quesada did a cover. Paolo Villanelli, breaking the news here, but he did a cover for issue 2.
Awesome.
We just have just a murderer's row of cover artists doing variants and such. So yeah, definitely, it's coming from Image, and an Image imprint called Syzygy.
Okay. I have not heard of that one. I've read some Image, so I'm excited to pick it up. I don't read a lot of indie books, I guess you could
Mhm.
call them, but I read the premise when the news broke, and I was like,
Mhm.
oh, I'm very interested to seeing that, and hearing the kind of inspiration of the story makes it even more interesting to me. So I look forward to it. Your daughter, this is her first writing experience? I'm not sure how old she is.
Yeah, she's 19.
Okay.
She did some junior journalism back in the day for the Daily News, including she interviewed Ali Cravalho for the star Moana, and Lin-Manuel Miranda and Steven Spielberg. And
Holy cow, that's cool.
yeah, yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah, actually, I'll tell a quick story if that's okay.
Sure.
But when she was preparing and she was younger then, it was when the BFG, the Steven Spielberg kids movie came out, and I was like, you can ask him, come up with your questions. And so one question, every time she watched Jaws, she cried at the exact same time, no matter how many times she saw it. And that was when the dog disappears. So it's implied that the dog Pippet is eaten by the shark. The person on the shore is throwing the stick, and then you see the stick bobbing in the water, but no Pippet.
Yeah.
So, I mean, she could care less about the humans being eaten, but the dog was very, very traumatic for her. So she asked Steven Spielberg, she said, is it possible, because we didn't see the demise of Pippet on screen. Like, is it possible that Pippet survived? So he said, I was very young in my career. If I did it now, I probably wouldn't have done that scene with the dog. But at the time, I felt like what would make the shark look truly evil, and it's like this poor defenseless dog.
Mm.
So he said, but it's possible that the person throwing the stick on the shore was not Pippet's owner. It was just somebody else, and Pippet got frustrated having to chase the stick all the time, so he just swam home and had dinner. So I
Aw.
said, so it survived. And so I said after the interview concluded, I was like, Naomi, you realize like Steven Spielberg just retconned Jaws for you
For you.
to
That's
save the
awesome.
life of the dog. So it's like, I don't think you fully appreciate how cool that is.
That is really
Uh,
neat. That is a fun story. Man, that's really cool. I, Again, I appreciate your time, Ethan. Do you
My
care
pleasure.
for the audience? Do you have any where they can find you on social media
I mean, I'm on Twitter still for now, Ethan
for
J.
now?
Sachs. I'm also just dipping my toe in Threads and Blue Sky. You can just find me under my name, Ethan Sachs. And yeah,
I thank you for your time. I've enjoyed our conversation.
thank you, sir. Likewise.
Yeah, and for the audience, I'm going to put some links to where you can find Ethan's work. I'm going to keep it to Star Wars. He's written a few things, but since we're a Star Wars podcast, I'm going to put links to where you can find it. And I highly recommend Bounty Hunters. It is a very fascinating and very fun series.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Ethan, again. And audience, may the force be with you.